Hi, I'm Quinn from Autistamatic, and this is 30 Days of Autism Awareness. If you talk to people about autism or read about it online or in print, it won't take long to find someone saying that people with autism are devoid of empathy. Some go as far as to say that such empathy is the defining aspect that separates humans from animals. That's a pretty low blow, guys. Empathy comes in different forms. It's not just one thing. There's at least two universally acknowledged varieties, and active debate about there being many more. The myth likely stems from the simple fact that autistic people process information and emotions differently. Because our behaviours don't fit the expected pattern, or may be shaped with logical reason rather than knee-jerk emotional reactions, we confuse people. Our lack of easy-to-predict response is misinterpreted as both a lack of emotion and an absence of empathy. Some of us also process our emotions more slowly than others. It's an advantage in times of crisis because it allows us to keep our heads when all about are losing theirs. I found myself in the weird position of being pushed into leadership during a crisis because of my calm, cool, ordered approach. Yet afterwards I'm swiftly kicked back to the bottom of the pile for supposedly being unfeeling and out of touch. I've been told to my face many a time that I clearly don't care about somebody or some tragedy because I didn't act normally, whilst I was being torn apart inside by my anger, sorrow or grief. Just because the surface behaviour of an autist doesn't fit the stereotype we expect for a given circumstance, don't mistake it for a lack of emotion or of empathy. Some of us are hyper-empathic. In fact, we feel the pain and joy of others so deeply it numbs our senses. Their apparent lack of emotion is simply them being overwhelmed by too much feeling. Whilst there are people in this world who do have a total lack of empathy, they are not by default autistic. Nor should you accuse an autistic person of lacking empathy. It's cruel and dehumanising, a nasty, spiteful act. Exactly the sort of thing a person who prides themselves on their own empathy would never do. Some autistic people have difficulties with motor skills. It's not a defining aspect of autism, but it's certainly one many of us share. But like many other phenomena within autistic life, it can have its own contradictions. Just like our sensory differences don't necessarily involve a complete sensory experience, but only a part of it, like my own sensitivities to certain types and frequencies of sound rather than sound in general, our motor skills can be good or bad in particular areas too. It's one of those things you learn about yourself as you explore autism. Our skills, our senses, and even our coordination are subject to spikes. Rather than a consistent, flat skill level across most things, we tend to be really good at some things and terrible at others. In my case, I have really poor gross motor skills. Yes, I can walk in a straight line and stand up without falling over. I've been driving for 25 years and never had an accident of any sort, but anything that requires speed or strength, and I'm hopeless. Throwing things, catching things or aiming things are my weaknesses. When I went through the torture of sports and PE at school, I was the worst at just about everything. I fell over every hurdle, sliced every ball and missed every catch. Now that may lead you to think that my hand-eye coordination sucks, and so did I back then. That was until I developed a childhood interest in electronics. Just simple circuits, flashing lights and homemade stylophones. I was a whiz with a soldering iron, really quick and accurate. My work was immaculate. Later, in early adulthood, I took on a job in a laboratory making medical appliances, and for the next couple of decades, I spent every day manufacturing, refining, and assembling items by eye to precise specifications. I trained dozens of people over the years to do my job, but none of them could match my instinctive grasp of the job. It turned out that my hand-eye coordination isn't poor at all. It's really good, in fact. I just have a brain that can apply it far better to tiny, precision-based tasks than those requiring larger, broader strokes. I may be the wooden spoon winner on a sports field, but give me a precision screwdriver and I'll be on the podium every time. One of the biggest mistakes non-autistic people make when talking about autism is confusing co-occurring conditions, what we used to call comorbids, with being symptoms of autism itself. Everything from epilepsy through learning disabilities to stomach trouble all get described as symptoms, yet they don't appear in any diagnostic criteria, and they also appear in people who aren't in the slightest bit autistic. Arguably the most common co-occurring condition, one which affects over half of us, is one which non-autistic people hardly ever mention: anxiety. I've asked myself why that might be for many years, and I think I have the answer. It's non-autistic people that cause it. Not intentionally, much of the time, but they cause it nonetheless. So what have been the causes of my anxiety in the past? It's been social expectations, family gatherings, nights out, parties and get-togethers. All occasions which put me at a disadvantage because I can't make sense of the irrational behaviours of those around me, nor navigate the complex web of loyalties, alliances and common enemies within their structures. It's been education, where I constantly hit the contradictory barriers of being called lazy or stupid because I put too much work in or knew too much. The workplace has made me anxious since I first started earning a wage. More political games of loyalties and alliances. People constantly jockeying for power and advantage over the colleagues they claim to proudly support. Only now there's the added incentive of financial security mixed in. Get it wrong, and you're not only embarrassed, you could be out of a job too. Until I met my wife, every friend, colleague, relative and partner has been a source of anxiety. Some obviously much more so than others. I've rarely had a day free from it in all my life. Like most autists, I didn't recognise it for what it was for a very long time. It wasn't until my mid-30s that I realised that what I described as being stressed or feeling pressured was actually profound and sustained anxiety. Recognising it for what it was the first step in controlling it. Since the neurotypical world makes as little sense as ever, I'll never be free of anxiety, but I can take steps to manage it. Not long ago, someone who has known me all my life told me about the blatantly selfish and harmful actions of another. I expressed my shock and disgust at such behaviour, but they asked me why. It's wrong, I said. Loads of people have been hurt just for a little financial gain. Why do you care? They asked me. It's not as if you got hurt. I do care though. I can't understand selfish behaviour. I can't comprehend how someone can put their own desires ahead of the needs or well-being of others. And I told them, that's why people think you're weird, they replied. Normal people don't think like that. You put yourself and your own first. That's how the world works. I've never thought like that. Everything I do is shaped by what I believe will bring the maximum benefit to the most people. In ethical terms, it's known as utilitarianism. You know, the Mr. Spock thing? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I simply cannot be selfish. It goes against the very grain of my soul. I have always put myself out to help others. If I am unwell, I'll still labour to help those in worse condition than I. It's the right thing to do. I don't say this because I want gratitude or praise. It isn't something special. I just can't relate to people who put their own desires first. Those who trample the poor, the disabled and the disenfranchised for personal profit or gain. Those who can readily ignore cries for help when they are able to give it. I say it because I constantly come across scientific papers and lectures from doctors and academics who state categorically that autistic people like me, are inherently more selfish than neurotypical people. I've heard it so many times, yet I don't see it. The majority of autistic adults I have met have been like me. They care about people so much they will gladly put their own needs to one side to help another, not according to the people whose opinions and so-called evidence decides our fate. Which begs the question, how can the self-appointed experts of the medical and scientific establishment not see this? And how much harm does their ignorance do? I hate confrontation. Raised voices, insulting language and hostility never fail to make me switch off. It makes me uncomfortable and I cannot react in kind. I'm not suffering PTSD from some past experience as a victim of violence. The moment people start using emotional triggers to win an argument, I start to shut down. And if they don't back off, I can become completely unresponsive. I lose the ability to speak. I don't mean I expect people to agree with me all the time. Quite the opposite. I've learned so much from people who've disagreed with an opinion of mine or pointed out my misunderstanding or ignorance. I relish being corrected, but there is a way to go about it. I respect people who use reason and example to explain. I can work well with those who can take on board that my mind works differently to the majority, so they can't take my beliefs, my behaviours or reactions for granted. They may need to explain some things they might expect others to know, but they may also find that I'm quite knowledgeable on other things they might normally have to explain. Those who get it wrong are those who think that they can influence me through emotional pressure. Calling me names, threatening me or attempts at emotional blackmail will not bully me into compliance. I will simply power down. I'll respond with kindness to sadness or hurt, but anger will never sway me. Similarly, I never respond with anger or aggression. If I've been wronged, I'll always attempt to calmly explain rather than lose my temper. I act towards others the way I would want them to act towards me. Change of opinion cannot be forced. It must be mutually agreed. Yet, despite meeting countless other autists who think, behave and react much the same as I do, why do I keep hearing that we are the aggressive ones? Where does this perception come from that autistic people are spiteful, self-centred and unbending? Why do pundits speculate that every thoughtless, self-serving populist politician may be autistic? Perhaps it's time the world started talking to us rather than about us. I had to take a break from making this series for a couple of days. On Tuesday, I got the news that my father had been admitted to hospital feeling very weak. On Wednesday, yesterday, I was told that it was coronavirus. Why am I here making a video about autism awareness then? 2 reasons. One is that doing something creative is one of the ways I manage stress and anxiety. The other is that right now is a great illustration of an aspect of autism that's often hidden. I don't know how I feel right now. I'm getting over the shock of the news and my anxiety is high. But if you ask me how I feel, I can't tell you. The most I can say is numb. I know from movies and TV how people might expect me to react. I know from the wonderful supportive messages people have sent me how I'm supposed to feel right now, but I don't feel much at all. If you switch off now thinking I'm a callous monster, then you'll be succumbing to one of the most cruel and harmful preconceptions about autistic people there is. The idea that we don't have feelings, or we don't care about other people. I will eventually know how I feel about this, and it will hit me hard. It may be days or weeks, but my feelings about this time will surface. It's not that I don't care or feel, it just takes a long time for me to process emotion. Right now I'm being solid, practical and dependable. I'm looking after myself and managing my anxiety so I can be ready to take action as and when any becomes viable. Any tears, any fear will come later. And they will come without warning. If I'm lucky, it'll happen in private. If I'm not, then I'll publicly break down in an emotional episode that will seem bizarre and unexplained to any onlookers. It's not me trying to be macho. It's something called alexithymia. It's part of the lives of half of autistic people and about 1/10 of people not on the spectrum. If you know an autistic person like me who seems cold or emotionally flat when you think they should be tragically sad or deliriously happy, stop to think before you make your mind up about them. Like me, they may not understand or express their emotions for a long time, and you may not get to see them when they fall apart. There have been many times in my life when I've had to explain something about autistic thinking or sensory needs to other people who've been contributing to my distress at the time. More than once, I've been met with a reaction like, "Not everyone's autistic. You can't expect the whole world to change overnight." And they're right. I've never thought otherwise. Neither I nor any other autist honestly believes that the world will change to accommodate us without a struggle. One big mistake that people make when we talk about the differences between autistic and neurotypical thinking, senses and communication is that they assume that we expect the world to bend to our will. They respond to us as if it's a one-sided process. It's ironic when you consider that the existing situation is already entirely one-sided. Autistic people are already going to great lengths to behave against our characters in order to fit in with non-autistic expectations. In order to be accepted, to get through education, to hold down jobs and make valuable connections, we have to wear a mask over our personalities. We have to hide our sensory discomfort. Our brains work in overdrive to work out how we're expected to think, and we force ourselves to communicate in a manner which suits the neurotypical majority. It ain't easy. It's exhausting. What I, and most of us, ask for is a little give in the opposite direction. That's what autism awareness, and especially acceptance, is all about. We don't want the world just to know we exist. We want to be accepted and understood. In the last 2 centuries, we have seen great leaps forward in acceptance of diversity. Whilst we've still a way to go, we've made huge progress towards acceptance of differences in race, culture, gender and sexuality. While there are still bigots, the direction of the world has shifted towards reducing barriers between different types of people. Autistic people are only seeking to do the same. To be allowed to be ourselves a bit more, rather than hiding behind a mask so as not to be seen. We've seen that things like the coronavirus can change the world overnight, so it's certainly feasible for us to be accepted and respected for who we are, even if that takes a little longer.